You know how some days you wake up and think, well, at least it can't get any worse than this. Yeah, those are the exact words that guarantee the universe will personally show up to prove you wrong, with interest. My name is Jake Martinez, and until about 3 hours ago, I was a perfectly reasonable maintenance engineer on Harmony Station. You know, fixing air recyclers, unclogging waste disposal units, the glamorous stuff that keeps a deep space education facility from becoming a frozen tomb of scholarly ambition. Simple job, predictable problems. Nobody expected me to have a degree in xenobiology or, God forbid, early childhood development. But here's the thing about working on a station that hosts the Galactic Education Exchange Program. Sometimes the regular teaching staff develops what medical professionals call acute existential terror syndrome, and what normal people call running away screaming. The announcement came over the intercom at 0600 hours, delivered in that artificially cheerful tone that administrative AI units use when they're about to ruin your entire day. Attention Harmony Station personnel. Due to an unexpected outbreak of Rigelian flu among our xenopedagogy staff, we require an emergency volunteer for today's special educational session. The assignment involves supervised learning activities, with 4 juvenile Vorthak specimens. Volunteer compensation includes hazard pay, full medical coverage, and a complimentary will preparation service. Now, I should probably mention that Vorthak are what polite xenobiologists classify as an apex predator species, with pronounced territorial and hunting instincts. What the rest of us call them is considerably less scientific, and involves a lot more profanity. But here's where human stupidity kicked in. You see, I heard hazard pay, and my brain immediately started calculating how many months of rent that would cover. I did not hear 4 juvenile specimens of a species that considers violence a form of artistic expression. So naturally, I volunteered. The first red flag should have been when Administrator Quillix, a normally unflappable Zentorian, looked at me with what I can only describe as the expression you'd give someone who just announced their plans to wrestle a supernova. She handed me a data tablet, emergency medical beacon, and what appeared to be a last will and testament form. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Engineer Martinez?" she asked, her translator giving her voice a distinctly nervous warble. The Vorthak delegation specifically requested that their offspring receive, quote, authentic educational experiences with other sapient species, unquote. They did not specify that those experiences should be survivable for the educator. The second red flag was when I walked into classroom 7 and found that someone had removed all the furniture and replaced it with what looked like padded surfaces designed to absorb impact, and possibly bloodstains. The third red flag was probably the fact that every other staff member I encountered along the way suddenly remembered urgent business in the opposite direction. Dr. Kelman claimed he needed to immediately recalibrate the navigation sensors. Professor Wicks developed a suspicious coughing fit and retreated to her quarters for emergency meditation. Even Jenkins from security, who once arm-wrestled a Korgan Marine for fun, took one look at my destination and decided that today was the perfect day to inventory the armory. Twice. But the final, unavoidable red flag that should have sent me running back to the relative safety of the plasma conduit maintenance tunnels was the sound coming from behind the classroom door. It wasn't talking. It wasn't playing. It was the kind of sound that evolution programs into your brain as things that want to eat you are having a discussion about logistics. I stood there for exactly 30 seconds, listening to what sounded like a pack of caffeinated velociraptors planning a heist, and thought about my life choices. All of them. Starting with the decision to leave Earth's nice, predictable gravity well, where the most dangerous thing in any classroom was usually a kid with a crayon and architectural ambitions. Then I remembered my credit account balance, took a deep breath, and opened the door. 4 pairs of multifaceted amber eyes turned to stare at me. 4 sets of what could generously be called teeth began what I would later learn was the Vorthak equivalent of curious purring. And 4 compact, chitinous bodies that looked like someone had taken a praying mantis, crossed it with a honey badger, and given the result tactical training, stopped whatever they were doing to focus their complete attention on the new arrival. The biggest one, barely knee-high but radiating the kind of confidence usually reserved for apex predators and tax auditors, tilted its triangular head and made a sound that my translation software unhelpfully rendered as, "Oh good, the entertainment has arrived." That's when I realized that hazard pay might not be nearly enough. Now here's where any reasonable person would have backed slowly out of the room, sealed the door, and called for someone with actual qualifications, like a xenobiologist, or an exorcist, or maybe just a really good insurance adjuster. Instead, I did what humans do best when faced with the impossible. I doubled down on stupidity and pulled out my data tablet. Okay, I muttered, keeping one eye on the 4 miniature engines of destruction while scrolling through the species database. Let's see what we're working with here. The Vorthak file opened with what I can only describe as the most cheerfully terrifying educational material I've ever encountered. Picture a nature documentary written by someone who thinks Australian wildlife isn't quite dangerous enough. Vorthak juveniles, I read aloud, because apparently I needed to hear this nightmare out loud to believe it. Reach physical maturity at approximately 50 standard years. During their extended adolescent phase, lasting roughly 4 decades, they exhibit several distinct behavioral characteristics designed to ensure survival in their native environment. The 4 little monsters had arranged themselves in what looked suspiciously like a tactical formation while I read. Professional interest, maybe. Characteristic 1. Acidic saliva production begins at approximately 6 months of age, reaching full potency by year 2. I glanced up. The biggest one was definitely drooling. And I'm pretty sure that wasn't normal drool, because it was eating a small hole in the floor padding. Characteristic 2. Pack hunting instincts manifest early, with juveniles demonstrating coordinated stalking behaviors by 18 months. As if on cue, 2 of them started moving in opposite directions, around the room's perimeter. Classic flanking maneuver. Characteristic 3, Vorthak young. Possess an innate understanding of structural weak points and will instinctively test the integrity of their environment through systematic destruction. One of the smaller ones was already examining what looked like a perfectly innocent wall panel, with the focused intensity of a demolitions expert. Characteristic 4. Juvenile Varthak communicate through a complex series of vocalizations including territorial announcements, hunting calls, and what researchers have termed recreational screaming. The moment I finished reading that sentence, all 4 of them opened their mouths and produced a sound that, I'm pretty sure, violated several interstellar noise ordinances. I closed the tablet and looked at them, really looked at them. The biggest one, clearly the leader, had positioning that suggested military training and an attitude that screamed I've never met a problem I couldn't bite my way through. I decided to call her Princess Fluffkins, because if I was going to die today, at least I'd die amused. To her left was a slightly smaller specimen who seemed fascinated by the structural integrity of everything in the room. This one got the name Chompy, based on the way it kept testing its teeth against various surfaces. The third one was practicing what looked suspiciously like stealth maneuvers, appearing and disappearing behind furniture with impressive skill for something the size of a house cat. Obviously, this was Bitey. And the fourth one, the smallest but somehow the most unsettling, was just sitting there, watching me, calculating. I could practically see the gears turning behind those multifaceted eyes. This little schemer became stabby, because something about its perfectly still demeanor suggested it was planning something elaborate and probably painful. Right, I said, setting down the tablet and trying to project the kind of confidence I absolutely did not feel. So, you're basically tiny, intelligent, acid-spitting pack hunters with architectural interests and a passion for recreational violence. Princess Fluffkins made a sound that the translator rendered as interested agreement. And I'm supposed to provide you with educational experiences for the next 8 hours without anyone dying, getting dissolved, or requiring emergency reconstruction surgery. Chompy tilted its head and made what sounded like a question. No, I don't know what we're supposed to learn either, I admitted, but I'm thinking we start with some basic ground rules about not eating the teacher. That's when it hit me. These weren't just baby monsters. They were baby monsters with the intellectual capacity to understand negotiation, which meant I could try treating them like what they were, incredibly dangerous, highly intelligent children who happened to be biologically designed for warfare. Or, to put it another way, like really, really dangerous puppies who could plot your demise. All right, team, I said, because apparently I'd decided to lean into the insanity. Here's how this is going to work. You're the scariest things I've ever seen, and I'm just a maintenance guy who fixes toilets for a living. But we're stuck together for the next 8 hours, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend that time running around screaming. Princess Fluffkins made a sound that might have been laughter. Or hunger. With Vortak, the distinction was apparently academic. You know that moment in action movies where the hero delivers an inspiring speech about teamwork and determination, and then immediately gets punched in the face? Well, real life doesn't wait for the inspiring speech to finish. The moment I said we're stuck together, Princess Fluffkins apparently decided that this was her cue to test exactly how stuck we were going to be. She launched herself at the nearest wall panel with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for long-lost relatives or particularly appealing prey items. The good news was that the reinforced panels held, The bad news was that they held just well enough to create a sound like a small explosion, which seemed to be exactly the signal the other three had been waiting for. Chompy immediately started what I can only describe as a systematic structural analysis of the classroom door, complete with experimental gnawing and what sounded like architectural commentary. Bitey vanished entirely, which would have been reassuring if I hadn't caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision that suggested she was conducting reconnaissance from positions that definitely shouldn't have been accessible to something without opposable thumbs. And Stabby? Stabby just sat there, watching me with the kind of patient attention that made it clear she was taking notes for future reference. "Okay, new rule," I announced over the sound of Princess Fluffkins discovering that the wall panels made different sounds depending on where you hit them. "No structural modifications to the classroom without prior approval from management, meaning me." Princess Fluffkins paused mid-attack and looked at me. Then she looked at the wall. Then she looked back at me, and made a sound that my translator helpfully rendered as, "But why not?" And that's when I realized something important. These weren't just random acts of destruction. This was curiosity. Violent, potentially lethal curiosity, but curiosity nonetheless. They were exploring their environment the same way human kids might explore a playground, except their version of playing on the monkey bars involved testing whether various materials could withstand industrial-grade bite force. "Because," I said, thinking fast, "there are rules about how proper pack leaders conduct themselves, and proper pack leaders don't destroy their own territory unless it's strategically necessary." Princess Fluffkins tilted her head. Chompy stopped gnawing on the door. Even Bitey materialized from whatever impossible hiding spot she'd found to listen. I had their attention. Now I just had to figure out what to do with it. "See, the thing about being apex predators," I continued, because apparently my survival strategy was going to involve a lot of improvised lectures on predator psychology, is that you need to show intelligence along with strength. Any idiot can break things. It takes real skill to know what's worth breaking and what's worth keeping intact. Stabby made what sounded like an interested chirp. "For example," I said, gesturing toward the door that Chompy had been systematically testing, "that door is the only thing standing between us and whatever's out in the corridor. Now, maybe there's nothing interesting out there, or maybe there are maintenance robots, or other species, or really fascinating new things to investigate. But if you break the door, we lose the ability to control access to our territory." Chompy looked at the door with what I chose to interpret as new appreciation for its tactical value. "Same with the walls," I continued, warming to the theme. "Sure, you could probably break through them eventually, but then what? You've compromised the structural integrity of your base of operations, potentially created security vulnerabilities, and definitely annoyed the administrative staff who are going to have to file incident reports." Princess Fluffkins made a sound that suggested she hadn't considered the paperwork implications of her actions. "So here's what we're going to do instead," I said, because apparently I'd committed to this approach and was just going to have to see where it led. "We're going to establish some basic operational protocols. Think of it as pack hierarchy, but with more rules and less biting." I held up one finger. "Rule 1. No permanent modifications to the facility without tactical justification and prior authorization." Princess Fluffkins clicked her mandibles in what I hoped was agreement. "Rule 2. No testing bite strength on anything that screams, bleeds, or files incident reports. That includes me, any visiting personnel, and the furniture if it turns out to be sentient." Chompy made a disappointed sound but nodded. "Rule 3. Stealth exercises are encouraged, but no one disappears for more than 5 minutes without checking in. We're a pack, which means we maintain situational awareness of all pack members at all times." Bitey materialized right next to my elbow, which nearly gave me a heart attack but seemed to indicate agreement with the principle. "And Rule 4, I said, looking directly at Stabby. "No planning elaborate schemes without running them by pack leadership first. I don't care how brilliant your ideas are, if they involve property damage or potential casualties, we discuss them as a team." Stabby tilted her head and made what sounded like a question about the definition of potential casualties. "Anything that might require medical attention, emergency evacuation, or a really awkward conversation with your parents," I clarified. For exactly 3.7 seconds, all 4 of them sat perfectly still and looked at me with what I chose to interpret as respectful attention to their new pack leader. Then Princess Fluffkins noticed that the ceiling panels looked different from the wall panels, and wondered if they made different sounds too. 2 hours into what I was beginning to think of as the longest workday in human history, Princess Fluffkins made a sound that didn't need translation. It was the universal language of I'm hungry and everything around me is starting to look edible. The other three immediately perked up with the kind of focused attention that prey animals probably recognize right before everything goes sideways. Right, I said, consulting my tablet with the growing certainty that I was about to discover new and creative ways to regret my life choices. Feeding time, how hard can it be? The answer, as it turned out, was considerably harder than rocket surgery performed during a seismic event. According to the species file, Vorthak juveniles required live or recently deceased protein sources with appropriate mineral content, preferably exhibiting natural defensive behaviors to stimulate proper hunting responses. The recommended feeding schedule was small prey items every 2 to 3 hours, with occasional larger challenges for pack coordination exercises. I stared at that for a long moment, then looked at 4 expectant faces that were beginning to show the kind of interest in my general direction that suggested I might accidentally qualify as a larger challenge for pack coordination exercises. "Okay, team," I said, because panic was not going to improve this situation. "Field trip to the kitchen." The journey down the corridor was an education in applied xenobiology. Princess Fluffkins took point, moving with the kind of confident swagger that suggested she owned the place and was graciously allowing the rest of us to exist in it. Chompy and Bitey flanked our little formation, heads constantly moving as they catalogued potential threats, escape routes, and what I was beginning to suspect were structural weak points for future reference. Stabby brought up the rear, which should have been reassuring except for the way she kept glancing back at the path we'd taken like she was memorizing it for strategic purposes. The station's main kitchen was designed to accommodate the dietary requirements of 17 different species, which meant it had more specialized equipment than a hospital and more safety protocols than a nuclear reactor. Under normal circumstances, this would have been reassuring. These were not normal circumstances. "Computer," I said, approaching the central food preparation unit, "I need to synthesize appropriate nutrition for 4 juvenile Vorthak specimens." The kitchen's AI responded with the kind of helpful cheerfulness that made me want to break things. "Certainly, Engineer Martinez. Vorthak juvenile dietary requirements include life protein sources with defensive capabilities. Shall I prepare standard prey simulation creatures?" "The creature prey simulation creatures," I repeated, because apparently my day needed to get weirder. "Certainly. Standard protocol for predator species includes synthesized prey items programmed with appropriate flight responses, defensive behaviors, and nutritional content. Today's selection includes Terran nanolog rodents, Centauri whistle mice, and Rigelian panic birds." Before I could process the full implications of feeding synthetic, terrified animals to a pack of baby apex predators, the replication unit hummed to life and began producing what looked like a cross between a hamster and a small, very agitated chicken. The moment the first whistle mouse materialized, 4 sets of predator instincts kicked in simultaneously. Princess Fluffkins dropped into what I can only describe as a tack position. Chompy started making tactical assessments that sounded like military briefings. Bitey simply vanished, which meant she was probably already positioning herself for an ambush. And Stabby sat perfectly still, watching the chaos with the expression of someone taking detailed notes for future reference. The whistle mouse, meanwhile, was living up to its name by producing a sound like a tiny air raid siren while running in circles around the kitchen, with the kind of desperate energy that comes from being artificially programmed to believe you're about to die horribly. "This is not going to work," I muttered, watching Princess Fluffkins coordinate what appeared to be a tactical assault on something the size of a dinner roll. That's when inspiration struck, or possibly when I finally snapped under the pressure. Either way, I found myself doing something that would have gotten me fired from any reasonable job, but seemed perfectly logical under the circumstances. I started rummaging through the maintenance supplies I'd been carrying in my toolkit. "Computer, cancel the prey simulation," I announced. "We're going to try something different." Using a gravity generator calibration tool, 2 spare plasma conduits, and what I'm pretty sure was a repurposed waste recycling component, I cobbled together what could charitably be described as the galaxy's most dangerous automated feeding system. The modified replication unit would produce standard protein cubes, but they'd be launched through a series of tubes at varying speeds and trajectories, complete with randomized movement patterns and what I like to think of as evasive maneuvers. "Okay, team," I said, stepping back to admire my improvised nightmare of engineering. "Instead of hunting something that's programmed to be terrified, how about we see if you can catch something that's programmed to be challenging?" Activated the system, and immediately protein cubes began ricocheting around the kitchen like caffeinated ping-pong balls with attitude problems. Princess Fluffkins looked at me with what I chose to interpret as respect for my innovative approach to prey delivery systems. Chompy made an approving sound as she calculated intercept trajectories. Even Stabby seemed impressed by the tactical complexity of the challenge. And Bitey? Bitey caught 3 protein cubes in mid-air with moves that would have made a professional athlete weep with envy. For exactly 10 minutes, I felt like I'd actually figured something out. The babies were engaged, well-fed, and demonstrating the kind of pack coordination that would have impressed their parents. Then Princess Fluffkins decided that if bouncing protein cubes were good, bouncing protein cubes launched at twice the speed would be twice as good, and began making what I can only describe as helpful modifications to my improvised feeding system. That's when I learned that Vortac juveniles have an intuitive understanding of mechanical engineering that borders on the supernatural, and absolutely no understanding of concepts like maximum safe operating parameters or why the emergency shutdown exists. 6 hours into my educational experience with the galaxy's most dangerous daycare attendees, I made a discovery that would have been hilarious if it weren't so terrifying. Even apex predator babies eventually get cranky when they're tired. Princess Fluffkins had started making what I could only describe as aggressive yawning sounds, which involved baring all of her very impressive teeth while producing a noise like a chainsaw having an existential crisis. Chompy had begun testing her bite strength against increasingly inappropriate targets, including my toolkit, the floor panels, and what appeared to be her own tail. Bitey's stealth exercises had devolved into her disappearing and then immediately reappearing in the exact same spot, like she was too tired to maintain proper camouflage but too stubborn to admit it. And Stabby? Stabby was sitting perfectly still in the corner, staring at absolutely nothing with the kind of 1,000-yard stare that suggested she was either achieving enlightenment or planning something that would require cleanup crews. Right, I said, consulting the species database with the growing certainty that I was about to discover new depths of cosmic irony. Let's see what the experts have to say about Vortac sleep patterns. The file opened cheerfully, as if it were discussing something as mundane as human bedtime routines instead of the nocturnal habits of creatures designed by evolution to be the stuff of nightmares. Vortac juveniles require 12 to 14 hours of sleep per standard day, I read aloud, because apparently I'd developed a habit of narrating my own doom. However, Vorthac's sleep differs significantly from most species in that they remain partially conscious during rest periods, maintaining awareness of potential threats through what researchers term combat dreaming. A dreaming? I paused. Combat dreaming? The file helpfully elaborated. During sleep, Vortac juveniles continue to process sensory input and may react to perceived threats with full waking responses. Additionally, dreams often involve hunting scenarios that may result in physical movement, vocalizations, and coordinated pack behaviors. Caregivers are advised to maintain safe distances during sleep periods. Princess Fluffkins chose that moment to demonstrate exactly what aggressive yawning looked like when combined with stretching, which involved her extending claws I hadn't even known she had, while making a sound that suggested she was practicing her war cry. Okay, team, I said, because apparently my survival strategy now involved treating every potential disaster as a team-building exercise. Time for some rest, but we're going to do this properly, which means establishing a secure sleep perimeter and appropriate rest protocols. Chompy looked at me with interest. Bitey materialized next to my elbow with what I was learning to recognize as her "explain this concept" expression. Even Stabby focused her 1,000-yard stare in my direction. See, the thing about proper pack dynamics, I continued, warming to the theme because it seemed to be the only approach that worked, is that rest time is just as important as activity time. But when you're apex predators, you don't just curl up anywhere and hope for the best. You establish defensive positions, assign watch rotations, and create contingency plans. Princess Fluffkins made what sounded like an approving chirp, but I noticed she was eyeing the padded floor areas with what looked suspiciously like tactical assessment. So here's how we're going to do this, I said, pulling out my maintenance kit and hoping that creative problem-solving would once again save me from having to explain to alien parents why their children had accidentally demolished a space station during nap time. Using emergency lighting units, I set up what I grandly termed perimeter illumination around 4 designated sleep areas. To the babies, these probably looked like sophisticated territory markers. To me, they were a way to keep track of where everyone was when they started dream hunting. Next, I activated the classroom's environmental controls to lower the temperature by exactly 3 degrees, because the species file mentioned that Vortac preferred slightly cooler conditions for optimal rest. I also adjusted the air circulation to create what I hoped was a subtle white noise effect that might mask any sounds from the corridor that could trigger their threat detection instinct. "Now," I announced, settling myself in the center of the room with my back to the wall and my emergency beacon within easy reach. Story time. 4 pairs of multifaceted eyes focused on me with laser intensity. "Once upon a time," I began, because apparently my career transition from maintenance engineer to xenobiological childcare specialist was going to involve impromptu storytelling, there was a pack of young hunters who lived on a station far from their homeworld. Princess Fluffkin settled into what looked like a comfortable position, though she kept her head raised and oriented toward the door. Professional habits, apparently. "These young hunters were the finest of their kind," I continued, "with skills that impressed even the adult members of their species. They could coordinate tactical maneuvers, assess structural integrity, conduct stealth operations, and plan complex strategies." Stabby made what sounded like pleased agreement. "But the most important skill they had," I said, watching as Chompy began to settle down while still maintaining what was clearly a defensive posture, "was knowing when to rest so that they could perform at peak efficiency when action was required." Bitey had chosen a position that was somehow both comfortable and strategically positioned for rapid movement. I was beginning to think that Vortak didn't so much sleep as enter a state of tactical readiness with closed eyes. "Because you see," I continued, lowering my voice to what I hoped was a soothing tone, "the greatest hunters know that rest isn't weakness, it's preparation. Every moment of proper rest makes you faster, smarter, and more effective when you need to be." Princess Fluffkin's eyes had begun to close, though her head remained perfectly positioned to monitor the room's entrances. "And the wisest hunters know that a pack that rests together stays alert together. They watch over each other, even in sleep, because that's what makes them stronger than any individual could ever be." The room was getting quieter, filled with the soft sounds of what I hoped was peaceful Vorthak slumber, rather than the preliminary stages of coordinated dream warfare. "So the young hunters settled down in their secure territory," I concluded, "knowing that they were safe, that they were together, and that when they woke up, they would be ready for whatever adventures awaited them." Chompy made a soft sound that might have been contentment. Bitey had achieved the impressive feat of looking simultaneously relaxed and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Stabby appeared to be genuinely asleep, though something about her posture suggested she was probably still plotting something, even in her dreams. "And Princess Fluffkins?" Princess Fluffkins opened one eye, looked directly at me, and made a sound that my translator rendered as, "Good story, pack leader. We will rest now, but we will remember this." For exactly 47 minutes, the room was peaceful. The babies slept, with the adorable ferocity of creatures who could probably take down prey twice their size but were currently dreaming about it instead of actually doing it. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, I was getting the hang of this whole interspecies childcare thing. Then Princess Fluffkin started sleep hunting, which apparently involved coordinating tactical maneuvers with the other 3 without actually waking up. That's when I learned that combat dreaming wasn't just a technical term, it was a warning. You know how in horror movies, there's always that moment of false calm right before something terrible happens? Well, real life has a similar sense of dramatic timing, except instead of ominous music, you get the subtle hum of life support systems and the gentle sound of 4 apex predator babies coordinating a dream hunt against imaginary prey that might or might not include you. I was sitting in the corner of the classroom, watching Princess Fluffkins lead what appeared to be a tactical assault on a nightmare version of the protein cube delivery system, when the door chimed with an incoming visitor request. My tablet displayed a message that made my heart perform several physiologically impossible maneuvers. "Vorthak delegation arriving for offspring retrieval and educational assessment. Estimated arrival, immediate." "Oh, wonderful," I muttered, looking at 4 sleeping babies who were currently demonstrating pack coordination techniques that would have impressed a military strategist. Time to explain to a species of warrior philosophers why their children are dream hunting in my jury-rigged daycare center. The door opened with the kind of soft, mechanical whisper that somehow managed to sound ominous, and 3 adult Vortak entered the classroom with the fluid grace of creatures who had never encountered a problem they couldn't solve through superior tactical thinking, and if necessary, superior violence. If the babies were miniature engines of destruction with architectural interests, their parents were what happened when you gave those engines 40 years of experience, advanced tactical training, and the kind of confidence that comes from being apex predators on a galactic scale. The first one through the door was easily 7 feet tall, with chitinous plating that looked like it had been polished to a mirror shine and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room in a single glance. This had to be Princess Fluffkin's parent, based on the way she carried herself like she owned the universe and was graciously allowing it to continue existing. The second was slightly smaller but somehow more unsettling, moving with the kind of precise control that suggested every motion was calculated, for maximum efficiency. Definitely Stabby's genetic contributor, based on the way she immediately positioned herself with clear sightlines to all potential threat vectors. The third moved with a fluidity that made me think of water, or maybe liquid death, appearing and disappearing from my peripheral vision in a way that suggested advanced stealth capabilities. Bitey's parent, without question. And bringing up the rear was a fourth Vorthak who somehow managed to look both scholarly and absolutely terrifying, carrying what appeared to be official documentation and the kind of expression that suggested he was prepared to file very detailed reports about whatever he was about to discover. Chompy's contribution to the family tree, clearly. They stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, taking in the scene. 4 sleeping juveniles arranged in tactical formation around a human who was sitting in the corner with a maintenance toolkit, an emergency beacon, and the expression of someone who had recently discovered that the universe had a very specific and very twisted sense of humor. Princess Fluffkin's parent spoke first, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made it clear she was accustomed to giving orders that were followed without question. My translator rendered her words as, "Engineer Martinez, I presume. We have come to collect our offspring and evaluate their educational experience. Please provide a summary of the day's activities." I looked at the sleeping babies, who had apparently moved on from hunting imaginary prey to what looked like coordinated perimeter defense, and realized that I was about to give the most surreal performance review of my career. "Well," I began, because apparently my approach to interspecies diplomacy was going to involve radical honesty, "your children are remarkable. They've demonstrated advanced tactical thinking, impressive problem-solving abilities, and pack coordination skills that would impress a military academy." Stabby's parent tilted her head with interest. "Elaborate." "Princess Fluffkins showed exceptional leadership qualities, successfully organizing the group's activities and demonstrating strategic thinking in both exploration and resource acquisition scenarios." I gestured toward their sleeping leader, who was currently maintaining defensive positioning even in REM sleep. Chompy displayed remarkable analytical capabilities, conducting systematic structural assessments and showing genuine curiosity about engineering principles. Chompy's parent made what sounded like pleased surprise. Bitey exhibited advanced stealth capabilities and demonstrated exceptional spatial awareness, conducting reconnaissance operations with professional-level competence. The fluid parent made a sound that might have been pride. "And Stabby," I continued, looking at the smallest sleeping form, "showed strategic planning abilities that frankly made me nervous. She spent most of the day observing, calculating, and what I can only assume was developing comprehensive tactical assessments of our environment." Stabby's parent made what I chose to interpret as satisfied approval. "However," I continued, because honesty seemed to be working, "I should mention that we had some challenges with impulse control, structural modification attempts, and what I've come to think of as creative interpretations of safety protocols." Princess Fluffkin's parent made an inquiring sound. "For example, during feeding time, your children decided that my improvised protein delivery system could be improved by modifying it to operate at approximately 3 times its designed capacity, which resulted in what could charitably be described as a high-energy nutritional experience." Chompy's parent made what sounded suspiciously like laughter. "And during rest period," I continued, gesturing toward the still sleeping tactical formation, "I discovered that Vorthak juveniles don't so much sleep as enter a state of combat readiness with closed eyes, which meant that nap time involved coordinated dream hunting exercises." All 4 adult Vorthak exchanged what appeared to be meaningful glances. "Engineer Martinez," Princess Fluffkin's parent said slowly, "you are telling us that you successfully managed 4 juvenile Vorthak for an entire standard day period without casualties, structural damage, or emergency intervention?" "Well," I said, "there was some minor improvisation with the feeding system, and I may have exceeded my authority regarding environmental controls, and I'm pretty sure I violated several safety protocols, but technically nobody got hurt, and the classroom is still structurally sound." "And they responded to your authority?" Stabby's parent asked, with the kind of tone that suggested this was not a common occurrence. "Eventually," I admitted. "Once I figured out that they needed pack leadership rather than traditional childcare approaches. They're not just intelligent, they're tactically intelligent. You can't manage them like regular children, you have to work with them like junior members of a military unit who happen to be extremely small and prone to testing boundaries. Bitey's parent made what sounded like impressed assessment. More importantly, I found myself continuing because apparently surviving 8 hours with their children had given me the confidence to offer unsolicited parenting advice to a species of apex predators. They need challenges that match their capabilities. They're too smart and too skilled to be satisfied with standard educational activities. They need problems that require coordination, strategy, and creative thinking. All 4 adults were staring at me now with what I hoped was professional interest, rather than the kind of attention that preceded becoming a cautionary tale. That's when Princess Fluffkins woke up, took one look at her parent, and made a sound that my translator rendered as, "Pack leader human taught us proper territory management and coordinated feeding strategies. We performed tactical exercises and established defensive perimeters. It was educational." Chompy stirred and added what sounded like, "He made the food bounce and move in challenging patterns. It required skill to catch." Bitey materialized next to her parent and contributed what appeared to be a detailed tactical assessment of the day's activities. And Stabby opened one eye, looked directly at me, and made a sound that the translator rendered as, "We like this one. He understands proper pack dynamics." Princess Fluffkin's parent looked at me for a long moment, then made what I could only describe as a sound of profound respect. "Engineer Martinez, the Vorthak delegation would like to formally request your services for future educational sessions with our juveniles. Additionally," Chompy's parent added, "we would be interested in discussing your potential involvement in developing advanced educational protocols for other apex predator species offspring. Furthermore," Bitey's parent continued, "your innovative approach to interspecies childcare management suggests qualifications for a position in our diplomatic education exchange program. And finally," Stabby's parent concluded, "we believe your skills would be valuable in training other caregivers who work with tactically advanced juvenile species." I stared at them for a moment, then looked down at my emergency beacon, my maintenance toolkit, and the 4 baby apex predators who were now fully awake and looking at me with what I had learned to recognize as affectionate respect. "So," I said slowly, "you're telling me that volunteering for hazard pay as a substitute teacher has somehow qualified me for a career in interspecies military daycare?" Princess Fluffkins made what sounded like agreement. "And that my qualifications include surviving 8 hours with your children without anyone getting dissolved, eaten, or requiring emergency reconstruction?" All 4 adults made sounds of affirmation. "And you want me to do this professionally, as in my actual job?" The unanimous response suggested that yes, the universe had decided that Jake Martinez, former maintenance engineer and current expert in apex predator childcare, had found his true calling. I looked at Princess Fluffkins, who was regarding me with the kind of expression that suggested she was already planning our next educational adventure. I looked at Chompy, who appeared to be mentally cataloging all the structural modifications she wanted to discuss. I looked at Bitey, who had somehow positioned herself for optimal hugging access. And I looked at Stabby, who was clearly calculating the most efficient way to convince me to accept their parents' offer. "Well," I said, because apparently my life had taken a turn toward the surreal and I might as well embrace it, "I guess I should update my resume. New job title, Interspecies Tactical Childcare Specialist. Previous experience, survived 1 day with 4 baby apex predators, and only had 3 minor existential crises." Princess Fluffkins made what sounded like laughter. Or possibly hunger. With Vortec I was learning the distinction was often academic. But this time, I was pretty sure it was laughter.